Growing up Reformed, the emphasis on knowledge is huge. I grew up Christian Reformed, and even like the way that, I was going to use the word indoctrinate, and I don't mean to sound so insidious, but like even the way that young adults are kind of like brought into membership is through the catechism, which is structured in this like very knowledge specific way. Like it's questions and answers, almost as if your belonging is dependent on your ability to answer questions. And there is an answer for everything, right? And so it's like, I remember the first time that I started preaching, my biggest fear was that I was gonna get like called out on being factually incorrect. I wasn't scared about speaking in front of people. I wasn't scared about slipping up. But like when I started preaching, I would literally rash up. Like I would get rashes on my neck because I had so much anxiety about getting something wrong. Like my nightmare would be someone coming up to me after the service being like, hey, you said that thing. Factually, that's incorrect. I fact checked you and you're wrong. Being wrong was the absolute worst thing that I could do. And so I think that that contributed partially to my obsession with acquiring knowledge over the years. And whether that was, through my own research, whether that was through pursuing higher education and going the academic route, like I had this idea in my head somewhere that like if I could just learn enough, then it would help me become who I thought I was supposed to be. And every time I would get a new book, at the beginning of every semester, I would love getting new textbooks, because to me, a new textbook meant like possibility. Like I was just like, I would get a new commentary and I would think through all of the amazing things God would do through me as I used the knowledge that I would acquire in this book. And it was this like, every book was so tied to like possibility and hope and all of these like, I don't know, just this idealized version of the future of God's church that I could partner with the activity of the Spirit, and I could be a part of something great. And I didn't get to preach from them as much as I would have hoped over the years, but when I did finally pull back from ministry, I'll never forget going into my church office. I had just taken a step back because I was burned out from COVID, and packing up my office was one of the most emotional experiences I've had in the last 5 years, because it felt like with every book that I took off the shelf and put in a box, I was taking an unrealized dream, an unlived dream. I was basically saying all these snippets of potential that I saw in my acquisition of knowledge over the years, like I was putting each of those dreams to rest. And I ended up, I had a full-on panic attack on the office floor as I was realizing the gravity and the grief of what I was feeling, because part of me felt like I was young, I was 31 or 32 when that was happening, and part of me was I feel like I never hit my stride. I would always frequently walk around when I was in ministry feeling like I had so much more to give, and I feel like I never got the chances to actually pour myself fully into something. And it was an incredibly emotional experience to literally take a dream off the shelf and put it into a box and close it and tape it shut. And, in some ways it was symbolic, and in some ways it felt like the most real spiritual practice that I've ever actually gone through. That kind of took me through this time in my life that really was focused on grief. Grief was the heartbeat of that season, where I couldn't engage in anything to do with church conversations for probably close to a year. I had chunks of hair falling out. I literally used to, in that time period, I would make room for one social event a week. I remember talking to my partner about that explicitly. I was I only have the capacity for one actual social event a week, because I would engage in conversations and they would just like put me flat on my back for days afterwards. I was so not well. And I think obviously like I was in need of like support for what I was going through from like a mental health standpoint. And eventually I did receive that support, but grief, I think, was just a huge part of that. I think I was grieving the life that I thought I was supposed to live. Like in my 20s, I gave up every single holiday, every single weekend. I remember the year before I finally stepped back, planning Christmas services because we were a multi-site church and I was overseeing rehearsals and trying to coordinate bands and all that kind of stuff. Like the 5 nights before, because our Christmas Eve service was always a big deal, and the 5 nights before our Christmas Eve service, I was out every single night at different rehearsals, at the office, getting things ready, connecting with people. And I just remember being like, I hope this is my last Christmas Eve service ever, because having like a 5-year-old at home and then just like realizing the cost of what it takes to like do that thing well, I was just like, I want nothing to do with that. It was right around this time that I began connecting with a friend who owned a tattoo shop locally. And I remember he advertised that they were looking for an artist, and I had kind of messaged him jokingly being like, I think it was the week that I had gone on leave, and I was like, what the fuck am I gonna do? And I was literally applying to like corporate jobs, and I was like, I have no idea what I'm gonna do. All I know is like, I'm a jack of all trades. I can do a little bit of everything, but my resume shows nothing other than like, you've been a pastor for the last 10 years. And I messaged my friend as I was like in between applying for jobs, and I was like, I'm not an artist, but like, would you take on an apprentice? Just kind of joking. And he was like, well, why don't we have coffee this week? And I was like, oh shit. Like, and it just kind of led to this conversation where he knew a little bit of my story and was like, hey, like, I know you're not in a place to probably start, being super intense with an apprenticeship, but like, why don't you come hang out at the shop for a day or two a week, and we'll just call it art therapy. I'll give you some drawing prompts, and we'll reevaluate in a couple months and see if you'd like to start an apprenticeship after that. And so I did that, and like, it felt so good to be doing something other than ministry, which was like probably just a result of burnout. But it was kind of that time where I was just like, wait a second, like, what if being me can exist outside of this like religious bubble where I'm like doing the Lord's work at all times? And so then I started my apprenticeship, and I started my apprenticeship in September of 2023. And the way that apprenticeships often work is like, you're doing a lot of drawing, but like, you're not touching a tattoo machine for like at least a year. And so that first year especially is like really focused on just like, you're mopping floors, you're cleaning toilets, and you're not paid for any of it. Every apprenticeship is set up differently, but at least the way that traditional apprenticeships are set up is like, in exchange for the knowledge you're receiving, like, you're kind of expected to pull your weight around the shop. And so, yeah, to go from like being kind of like at the center of things on stage in front of hundreds of people every single week at a multi-site church, salary, benefits, and the prestige of the office of pastor, to like, I'm scrubbing toilets every single, day, and mopping floors every day, and taking out garbage. And there was part of me that was like relieved to be doing something that felt just like honest, and just like using my hands and like cultivating this passion that I've always had for art. And that was like there was actually an element of like healing with that. But I began like cultivating this new life for myself, where I was also starting to become a little more aware of what my gender actually was, and how I actually wanted to present myself to the world and what I didn't want to be anymore and what I did want to be. And I was working through that year. I was also coming out to all of my close friends and family and working through the changes and the impact that had on those relationships. And that was its whole own thing. And there was a really beautiful year because almost every single one of my close friendships and relationships actually was so enhanced and deepened throughout that time. But it was also like emotionally exhausting because it felt like every conversation I was having with people would just like result in everyone breaking down and crying. But there was always this part of me, like, there's some version of this story that like could stop there and be like, and forever I found freedom and joy and love, and like that in itself would be a good ending to a story. But I always had this like part of me where I was like, the dreams I had packed away in that box, I was like, but what about that part? Like, what was it all for? Because in some ways I had this like before and after, where it was like, here was me before when I was beholden to the office of the pastor, and here's the life I cultivated around that. And now I've experienced freedom, but like these two things aren't like connecting. And so even after I had grieved it all, there was this part of me that was like, I feel like I'm in the right place. I've made the right decisions, but what do I do with all that shit from before? And that kind of like just was in the back of my head for the next 2 years.